Story 1. My wife tells me about it the next day. Her favorite story is that she woke up in the middle of the night to find me slowly walking out of our bedroom. She said, "Are you okay? What are you doing?" I said, "There is somebody downstairs in the kitchen unrolling the aluminum foil." She said, "Okay, what is your plan?" I said, "I am going to stop them." She said, "Shall we get a bit more sleep and then both go down together?" I said, "Okay," and I went back to bed. Later we found a small plastic bag on the floor near my head. It had been rustled by the curtain because the window was open. Story 2. Not my current partner but my ex-boyfriend sometimes talked in his sleep. The funniest time was when I was up reading a book and hadn't noticed he was already asleep next to me. Suddenly he shouted in a flawless British accent, "Will you just give me the fucking yogurt already, Shannon?" And it scared me. We're both German, and neither of our first languages is English. We didn't know anyone named Shannon. He's lactose intolerant. Story 3. He farted very loudly and proceeded to say, "You got the wrong guy." Story 4. My girl woke up one night and asked if I had found my rocks. I asked what she was talking about. She said she did not know and that she was just trying to make conversation, then promptly went back to sleep. She has no recollection of this. Story 5. My boyfriend woke me the other day by gently putting his fingers in my mouth. I kept moving my head away until I asked him to stop. He sounded genuinely upset and asked why I had woken him, because he had been having a nice dream about feeding a deer. Brilliant. Story 6. My boyfriend either recites postcodes because he is a delivery driver or calls the dog in his sleep. Either he is frustrated that no one is answering his postcode nonsense, or a 30-kilogram dog lands on me. Story 7. My aunt likes to tell the story of when she and my cousin shared a hotel room. She woke up needing to urinate and found my cousin sitting up in bed with her arms folded across her abdomen, rocking back and forth and giggling quietly. When my aunt asked what she was doing, my cousin said, "I'm holding a baby and it has an adult smile." I found this story deeply unsettling. Story 8. Once my ex said the word horse, just one word spoken with urgency. The same ex said I once sat straight up in bed and mumbled, "Jesus, Grandma, you scared the shit out of me." I had been dreaming I was in bed at night when my grandma, who was still alive at the time, wandered into the room and stood at the end of the bed with a blank stare. Story 9. So one time while my significant other was sleeping, she reached over and started to pet my legs softly. When I asked her what she was doing, she looked at me like I was stupid and said, "What does it look like?" "I am petting this fluffy baby penguin." Then she paused for a second, patted my leg again, and blurted out, "Wait, this is not a penguin." I have never laughed so hard at someone talking in their sleep. Thanks for the awards, kind strangers. Story 10. Fantastic sleep songs with lyrics that are utterly bizarre. My two absolute favorites have been 1. "Oh whoa, it is a corner cat." 2. "Obey my rules and you will always be a country cowboy." This line is repeated about 5 times and finishes with a yeah. Story 11. My wife started screaming one night that she was lost in the local grocery store and that, no matter where she went, she could not find her way out. I asked her if she had tried checking out at the cash registers. She looked at me and said in her most sincere voice, "That is why you are the smartest person I know." Then she rolled over and fell back asleep. Story 12. One night my boyfriend woke me by tapping my shoulder. He put his finger to his mouth and whispered "shoo," then pointed at the door and said he could hear something and told me not to move. I nearly jumped out of my skin. All the worst possible scenarios crossed my mind, and the silence after he shushed me felt like hours. Then he started waving his hands and talking about Tetris, the twirlies, and making sure we did not align. That is how I learned my boyfriend talks in his sleep. Story 13. Heck yes. Please take a seat. My wife has been an avid sleep talker for a long time, and her midnight utterances range from simple single words to elaborate speeches. The ones that really stand out are waking up in the middle of the night to her suddenly sitting bolt upright, throwing back the covers and screaming, "Tarantula!" That will wake you very quickly. She whispered my name repeatedly, waking me so she could say in a hushed, cautious voice, There is an alligator in here. When I played along and expressed concern, she whispered, "It's okay. It has been here before." My all-time favorite was when, she later explained, she was dreaming that I was playfully sneaking up on her and she caught me. From my perspective, she sat up in the middle of the night, stared into the darkest corner of the room, and repeated in a soft sing-song voice, "I see you." My blood ran cold. Summary: my wife is terrifying. Thanks for the awards. I'm glad this has made some people laugh or cry at work. Story 14. My grandfather was a heavy sleep talker. My grandmother told a funny story. One day, while he was sleeping, he asked, "Do I punch this man?" My grandmother replied, "Yes, punch him." He then punched her in his sleep. Story 15. My girlfriend once yelled in her sleep, "No, you spunky lesbian. I am a man." I still tease her about it. Story 16. My former roommate talked in his sleep. Once he cried out, "No, Gandalf." Story 17. I'm the sleep talker. Got this from my wife the next morning. Me sits bolt upright, they're coming. Everything's ready. Wife sleepily, huh. Me, they're coming. Everything's ready. Wife, they're coming? Me, hum. Wife, but everything's ready? Me, yes. Wife, sounds like we're okay then. Me, comically flops back down and instantly falls asleep. Story 18. My wife was mumbling a lot and suddenly shouted, "Donkey kick," as she kicked me in the shin, so that was fun. Story 19. Years ago, my wife was mumbling in her sleep and seemed a bit upset. I wanted to comfort her without waking her too much, so I said, "Honey, you're fine. Do you know where you are?" She hit me in the arm and said she was in the place where punch buggies are seen first. She then rolled over, muttered "chug a buggy" to herself, and went back to sleep. She didn't remember a thing the next morning. Story 20. My mom sometimes sleepwalks. When she was in residency, she came into my room late at night and sharply asked, "Did you give the patient her dose of the medication like I asked you to 15 minutes ago?" I groggily replied, "Who? What?" She huffed and said, "Well, I guess that answers my question." Then she turned and left without closing the door. She didn't remember a thing about it the next morning. Story 21. I was napping with my boyfriend when a loud noise woke me, but he was still asleep. Me, what was that? Him, either a tree or a magic eraser. Story 22. I have been told that, as a child, my father regularly sleepwalked into the bedroom of his father and urinated in his work shoes. Story 23. He got up, went into the kitchen and took one bite of a mini pecan pie without a fork, then apparently remembered he hated pecan pie and left it on a small box. Another time he sat up and stared straight at the wall and did not respond when I asked what was wrong. He stood up, walked into the wall, stood there as if contemplating the barrier, then backed up the way he had come, sat down and slid back into bed as if nothing had happened. It was creepy. Story 24. I have had funnier experiences than this one, but I cannot remember exactly what was said. Most recently, my boyfriend scooted over to cuddle in the big spoon, little spoon position, and I snuggled in thinking that was all. Then he got very close to my ear and whispered, "Just so you know, there is something in the closet, like a cartoon turtle." I did my best not to burst out laughing and said, "Okay, honey." When he woke up, of course he had no memory of it. Story 25. When I was a child, about 5 years old, I slept in my parents' bed because of a storm. Mom was awake. Dad and I were asleep. Suddenly, Dad and I had this cross-sleep conversation while Mom lay between us, quietly frightened. "Dad, you better not take my toys," I muttered angrily. "Okay, I won't," my father replied. "Don't even touch them." Okay. Not a particularly scintillating conversation, but notable because we were both asleep and still responding to each other. Felt like making Alexa and Siri talk to each other. Laughing out loud. Story 26. My boyfriend had his tonsils removed a while back, so he was on pain-reducing medication that kept him sedated and, in his words, made him a fucking dumbass. He had a conversation in his sleep with me about how I shouldn't trust leprechauns because they conned him out of gold coins by giving him foil-wrapped chocolate coins instead. He also said not to trust Irish people because they were honorary leprechauns. Story 27. Not my partner, but my younger brother and I used to share a room and sleep in bunk beds. One night I heard him mumble, "I do not create the weather. I just predict it." Story 28. My brother did that in the middle of the night. He would get up, go into the living room, say some nonsense to our parents, and go back to bed. It was actually pretty creepy the first few times because he said, "They are in the walls." Story 29. My mom used to wake me up for school because I would sleep through my alarms. She has many stories about strange things I said to her right before waking. "He is not here, check down the street. Just put it on the roof and it will blow away." Story 30. Not my partner, but my younger brother says the most ridiculous stuff. One time he said, "Get off my treasure," in a pirate voice. Another time he said, "Get your hands off my fish." Story 31. My mum jumped on my dad because, in her dream, he was a thief who had taken an old lady from the hospital, so she tried to catch him. I slept on it overnight, and when I read it again I realized it was the other way around. She thought she had to protect the old lady, so she jumped on the woman to shield her from the thief. Then she woke up on top of my dad. Story 32. One night my girlfriend was sleep talking. She kept asking, "Can we get that done this week, please?" I replied, "Huh?" and "Sorry." Finally I said, "Okay." And she said, "Thanks." Story 33. Not a partner, but at 1 o'clock in the morning I got a phone call from my friend in the next street. My 6-year-old daughter had just knocked on her door and then walked in, mumbling that she could not do her sums. I raced up there, walked home with her, put her back to bed, and she did not wake up or remember a thing the next day. By the next night our house was like Fort Knox. Story 34. He started shouting that he couldn't feel his left arm. I pointed out he was pinching his pillow, not his arm. He then freaked out that he had lost his arm. I pointed out his arm was under his pillow. He said okay and started snoring. Took me another hour to get back to sleep. Update. I went to bed and this went crazy overnight. Thanks to everyone who checked on his health. He participated in a sleep study and it was found to be stress-related, not sleep apnea. He did wake up, just not until the morning. I did not realize I had phrased it in such a way that people thought he had died. Story 35. My wife called me a wriggly little enzyme while she was sleeping. I have never heard her use that word before. Story 36. My girlfriend does a bit of sleep talking. I mentioned a sheep character from Animal Crossing named Dom, and she sounded like she was about to cry, saying he does not have hands. To be fair, he does not. Story 37. I laughed so hard. One time my ex was asleep and started snoring progressively louder. He startled himself half awake and said, "Shut up. I'm sleeping." I snorted my drink through my nose. Story 38. Oh man, not my partner, my brother. I was watching The Exorcist with my dad and my brother. At the beginning of the movie, some archaeologists find a small statue that releases a demon. After the film, my brother fell asleep on the other couch while my dad and I watched another movie. The moment the second movie ended, my brother sat bolt upright, walked to the middle of the room, and asked, "Where's the statue?" We said, "What statue?" He repeated, "The statue." Made a motion with his hands as if picking something up, moved it about a foot, set the imaginary statue down, and went straight back to sleep. My dad and I looked at each other in disbelief, then burst out laughing. Story 39. My boyfriend once blurted out, "You're putting bread in my ears." In his sleep, mumbled something unintelligible, and then followed up, "And I'm becoming a sandwich." It still makes me laugh whenever I remember. Story 40. My roommate during my freshman year of college was a sleepwalker and sleep talker. We lived in the dorms in a small room. One night I woke up and saw him sitting straight up on the side of his bed, staring at me with his eyes fully open and talking gibberish about golf. He kept mentioning Phil Mickelson or something. It was very creepy because he was looking directly into my eyes. The next morning I told him about it. He laughed and said, "Sorry, I tend to do that from time to time." Story 41. I'd be the king of Monaco. My wife said one night out of nowhere. The funniest part was her tone of voice. Proud and assertive, as if she were really sure of her claim to the throne. Anyway, the joke is on her. Monaco is a principality. Thanks, everyone. I have never had a post or comment receive more than 10 upvotes, and I have never received any awards. Story 42. My boyfriend sat bolt upright in bed in the middle of the night. He doesn't usually talk in his sleep. Him. There's a thing over there. Me. Absolutely terrified. What thing? Him. Upgrade. Me. Relieved but very confused. What kind of upgrade? Him. Bag. Me. Oh, a bag upgrade? Okay. Carry more stuff. Him. Yeah. He then flopped down and began snoring, letting me slowly recover from the massive spike in heart rate. Your boyfriend sitting up in a dark room and looking at the corner saying, "There's a thing over there," is not fun. Turns out he'd just been playing too many games. Story 43. Not a partner, but in military training in school I often took the night shift for guard duty. The number of sleepwalkers and sleep talkers was much higher than I expected. It is straight creepy when you have to walk down the halls with a covered flashlight, listening to large grown men mumbling and lashing out in their sleep. What takes the cake, though, is that often sleepwalkers will just stop randomly. You will be walking along in the pitch-black darkness and suddenly there is a man standing there. His eyes are usually closed or worse, open, his head tilted to the side or leaning against a bedpost or wall. After I had suppressed the swear words I was about to shout, there was nothing to do but prod him back to his bed. With all the randomness of military life, I really did not expect one of my jobs to be gently tucking my fellow soldiers back into their beds. Story 44. My husband woke up and told me about a crazy dream he had. In the dream, we were hosting a party and he was serving cookies, but he was upset because nobody was eating them. When we went downstairs, we discovered a full plate of cookies on the dining table. Story 45. I'm a sleep talker. I don't remember any of this, but my boyfriend said I did this to him. In the middle of the night, I hit my boyfriend's but hard with my knee. He was pretty upset. He sat up to stretch, and I said, "I'll stretch too." I stretched and lay back down. While making full eye contact with him, I grabbed the blanket and threw it off him, then rolled over and started snoring immediately. Story 46. We were newly married and living overseas. My husband hadn't slept much the nights before, which usually increases sleep talking. It was hot in our room. He mumbled something I did not catch. I asked him to repeat it. He got up, opened the bedroom window and said very pointedly, "Airflow, bitch," then lay back down, completely asleep. My husband has never called me a name or raised his voice to me, so this was especially funny. Thank you for the awards and upvotes. This happened before Breaking Bad was a big thing, so maybe my husband is the original Jesse Pinkman, except without all the meth and mayhem. Story 47. My boyfriend is bilingual, and sometimes I catch him sleep talking in Punjabi. I have never heard him sleep talking in English. He once punched me in the middle of my spine while he was fully asleep. When he woke up, he said that in his dream he was giving his mother cardiopulmonary resuscitation. He sometimes suffers from night terrors. It happened often when we first started dating, almost every time he slept or napped, but it had not happened for over a year. 2 nights ago he started screaming in his sleep. It was wild and terrifying. Story 48. When my girlfriend and I started dating, she told me she talks in her sleep and has nightmares fairly often. One of the first nights we spent together, she woke up at 2 a.m. and sat up very quickly. It woke me up, and I looked over only to hear her say, "Pizza, order a pizza." She then lay back down and began snoring within a minute. God, I love that woman. I was laughing out loud. Story 49. Not my partner, but my mother. She talks and moves a lot during the night. Last week she started running while lying down, like dogs do, and screamed, "Get out of the way!" I woke up in the other room to the sound of my father, who first wondered what was going on, and then laughed loudly as he told me what had happened. Story 50. My ex-girlfriend woke me from a dead sleep and said, "No trucks, subcompact cars only." After I repeated this to her, she asked, What the fuck is a subcompact car? Story 51. After watching the Lego movie, I really got into the Batman franchise, the comics, the movies, everything. This rather peeved my boyfriend. It peeved him so much, in fact, that one night while he was sleeping with his back to me, he suddenly sat bolt upright, turned to me and yelled "fuck Batman," right in my face. He then immediately slumped back down and continued snoring. Story 52. I am the sleep talker. A long while back, my fiancée was working a job where she did not get home until after midnight. She came home one night and was leaning over the table on my side of the bed. She swears that I looked up at her, smacked her on the top of the head, and when she asked what the hell, I told her I was checking to see if she was a ghost. I remember having a dream like this. In the dream, my hand went through her head, proving she was a ghost. Story 53. I worked with my girlfriend at McDonald's. She wakes me up to ask me to drop more fries, to tell me we are out of apple pies so do not ring them up, to make sure the sign light is on, and so on. She will sit up for this sometimes. I have never seen her get out of bed. I usually just say yes ma'am, will do, because she is the boss and she goes right back to sleep. She does not remember anything in the morning. It is the price of being ground to the bone at that place. I have dreams about it myself. I do not think I talk in my sleep though. Story 54. We'd have conversations. One of my favorites. You shouldn't fuck him in the ass. Why would I want to fuck John Stamos in the ass? No, not John Stamos. You shouldn't fuck him in the ass. Who? Joe Namath. What? You said you were going to. Story 55. Apparently I talk in my sleep sometimes. The one my fiancé will never let me forget is when I sat upright, looked toward the corner of the room, told him someone was watching us, and then lay back down. Story 56. I was out on the deck sharing a drink with a friend one night. My significant other walked out of the house, went down the stairs, got in the driver's seat of our car, sat there for about 5 minutes going through the coin trays and glove compartment, and then walked back upstairs into the house. Story 57. My husband once randomly blurted out, "Bread for the ducks," and got out of bed and went downstairs before curling back up on the sofa. He woke up so confused the next morning. He was convinced we'd had an argument he'd forgotten. Story 58. My girlfriend does not usually talk or sleepwalk, but one night she came out of the bedroom and began talking about the apples of data on the table while gesturing at something that was not there. I asked what she meant, and she became increasingly frustrated when I said I had no idea. Finally, she mentioned the data on the bedroom doors in a tone that suggested I would regret not seeing her data apples. Then she went back to bed. Story 59. Apparently, very early in our relationship, my wife said I suddenly sat bolt upright, swept my arm around, knocked everything off the bedside table and screamed, "Evil baby, have to kill it." She always brings it up with new people we meet. Story 60. No gems, just horrors. I sleepwalk occasionally. When I was a toddler, I used to sleepwalk, cry, and say she's following me, or try to leave the house by myself. Nowadays, if it happens, I wake up looking at my reflection in the mirror in the dark. When that happens, it freaks me out, so I cannot sleep the rest of the night. Update 1. Why don't I move or cover the mirror? The first time it happened, I covered the mirror, but with my morning rush to work, I would pull the cloth down to get ready and then cover it again when I reached home. I have had and still have peaceful nights of sleep with a dimmed light on, so eventually I stopped covering the mirror and focused more on not being afraid of the dark. When I least expect it, I catch myself waking up facing the mirror with a gentle head bump or nod. I get spooked, cover the mirror with a blanket, and the pattern repeats. I generally have good nights of sleep. These sleepwalks are very rare, so I am more concerned about my fear of sleeping in the dark. Cannot do it. I need a dimmed light for bedtime. Update 2. Is it this particular mirror? Yes, it's always this mirror, but maybe I have not had enough sleepovers to have another sleepwalking episode elsewhere. I think my subconscious remembers how I use the mirror during the day to get ready, do my hair and makeup, and try on clothes. I live in a shared flat, so I can only leave it in my room. It's a cheap full-length mirror, and anyway, these sleepwalks are so rare. Recent episodes have made me want to leave the mirror outside my room, but I do not want to make my flatmates uncomfortable by describing this particular sleeping habit. Story 61. This actually happened last night. My fiancée started talking to me as if we had never met before, and after a minute I realized she was dreaming about our first date. It was really wholesome, and I was surprised at how much detail she remembered. Story 62. My wife not only talks in her sleep, but she also hallucinates. She has woken me up numerous times because there were kittens under my pillow that she had to rescue. Another recent adventure was when she dreamed there was a snake in our bed that was going to attack me. She jumped out of bed, turned on the lights, and ripped off the comforter. She then told me how she had saved me, that she was a hero, and that she was excited to be meeting Steve Irwin. Story 63. My partner was asleep, and I was reading in bed. He mumbled, "The farters." I said, "The farters." He said, "The farters are farting. Prepare yourself." Cracks me up every time I think about it. Story 64. My boyfriend was asleep on the couch in our apartment. He sat up and said, "It's starting to look like my apartment in here." I asked what he meant. He said that with three-dimensional printing you could say, "Put a chair here, give me a chair there." Then he said there was an app for it. He picked up his work phone and looked for the app, made a frustrated sound, picked up his personal phone and looked again, said, "You wouldn't understand," and went back to sleep. Story 65. My best friend and I went to sleep in his basement after watching a horror movie. I realized I was sleepwalking when I regained consciousness while swinging on his rocking chair in the living room at 3 or 4 a.m. I had no idea how I got there or how long I had been on the chair. I was just swinging and staring at the television, which was obviously turned off, and I could not remember what I had done earlier. It freaked me out because I could not stop thinking about that movie. I used to sleepwalk a lot when I was younger. Sometimes I was partly conscious during the episodes. For some reason it felt like everything I did made perfect sense, even though it clearly did not. That particular incident terrified me the most. Edit. Wow, that was my first comment to blow up. It is nice, though, to see that other people have experienced similar things. I thought I was the only one. Story 66. I had to share a room with my brother in our teens. He always mumbled unintelligible garbage and woke me up. One night he blurted out, "The monkey eats the frog." The next day he kept telling everyone about a crazy Star Fox dream he had. As an adult, I am the sleep talker. According to past partners, I have some deep-seated insecurities. One line I said was, "Don't leave me. I am sorry I have a small mouth." Once I was half awake when my girlfriend tried to cuddle me from behind. I said, "You scared me. I thought you were a backpack." My last partner had a lot of fun with me. I told her, "Don't put me in the box." She proceeded to whisper in my ear about the box she was going to put me in, and I became more and more distraught. Story 67. I am a sleep talker. One of my husband's favorite stories is the night I sat straight up saying death to the Stormcloaks and immediately went back to sleep. I think he has shared that gem at every party since then. Story 68. My boyfriend laughs in his sleep. It is fucking terrifying to be woken in the middle of the night by someone snickering next to you. He did not know he did it, so he never had to tell me. The first time it happened, I thought someone had broken into the house and was fucking with us. He still laughs the same way now, and it still creeps me out. He also talks in his sleep. He always says things like, "My blanket needs trimming," or "The toes are in the bean jar." I have no idea what he is dreaming about, but it sounds awesome. Story 69. I am a former sleepwalker. My mother said I walked up to her bed and said that the cats were escaping. She politely told me we do not have any cats. I replied that this was why they were not there. She then told me to go back to bed. I do not remember ever saying that. Story 70. My ex-husband talked in his sleep every night. Our daughter began babbling as a baby and still talks in her sleep almost every night. Occasionally both of them yell out. One night, when I was still with my ex, I was on the edge of falling asleep when he suddenly yelled, "Chicken sandwich," and scared me half to death. Story 71. My husband sits up. "Oh no, babe, we have to go. There is a monster trying to attack us." "No, there isn't," I say. Then what do you call that? He says, dramatically pointing to an empty wall. I look at him and say, not a monster. Another time he turns on the light in his sleep to see if it will work. He has also explained to me in great detail how to build a house in Minecraft, why we could not fit our family on a spaceship, and why I needed to go to the store right then and there at 2 a.m. I love it. Story 72. My girlfriend said in her sleep, it's small, but it's okay. I have not shared this with anyone else except her. Story 73. My ex-wife told me that I once sat up straight in bed, pointed at the window and gravely said laser bitches. Story 74. One day, I do not know when, I just sleepwalked to the fridge, took out an entire chicken, and threw it off the balcony, where it nearly knocked someone down. I know this because they told me the next day. Story 75. As the annoying little brother, my sister often shouts at me in her sleep. It is usually about me irritating her. I am also a sleep talker. I have yet to find out whether we have ever had a shouting contest while asleep. Story 76. My girlfriend talks in her sleep. One time she yelled at me about how the water bottle lid screws down. Story 77. I once asked my boyfriend to make coffee well before my wake-up time. He happily did, but when I woke up I told him it was way too early for coffee and asked why he had done it. He was a bit annoyed at first, but once we found out what happened we laughed about it. Sometimes we have entire conversations that I do not remember. Story 78. Not my partner, but I was on a camping trip with some friends. At midnight one of them suddenly screamed, "Don't forget the Mountain Dew." He did not remember saying it. Best thing I've ever heard. Story 79. My brother, who is 6 feet 11 inches tall, came running down the stairs in a full panic attack about spiders. His eyes were shut the entire time, and he fell asleep in the chair afterward. Story 80. My now ex was dreaming that he was on a hill with parked cars when one of the car's brakes failed, and it slowly coasted downhill toward me. He jumped in front of it, bracing himself against the car to stop it and save me. In reality, he was just shoving the bed around the room at 2 in the morning. I learned the story from his answers to my questions before he partially woke up and fell asleep again. Story 81. My wife talks in her sleep. The night after we watched Insidious, she sat up in bed, bolt upright with her eyes closed. She turned her head toward me and said, "Why is there a girl in the corner?" She rolled back over and went sound asleep. Needless to say, the bedside lamp went on and I went back to reading for a little while. Story 82. I had a sleepover at my friend's house, and her brother was in her room with us because he was young and that was what he did. He had the bed and we were on the floor. Eventually he fell asleep, and we were reading her old messages like the pair of weird children we were. When he sat up, stared at us, said, "Lights out," and dropped back down. It was horrifying and still is to this day. We never told him. Story 83. I went to a private school for a couple of years and boarded there a few times. One morning I woke up to everyone looking extremely tired and angry with me. Apparently I had commentated an entire football match in my sleep, including replays and enthusiastic descriptions of the goals. I do not remember it at all. Story 84. My roommate talked a lot in his sleep. The usual noises were muttering, but my favorite incident occurred when I was watching Netflix. He suddenly sat up in bed, looked at me, and asked, "Where am I?" I replied, "In our room, dumbass." He answered, "Thank God. I thought I was in Afghanistan." He has no memory of it at all. Story 85. I once walked into the kitchen late at night and saw my husband wearing his shirt partially off like a shrug, with his underwear around his ankles, trying to urinate into an open dishwasher full of clean dishes. I shook him awake before the dishes got an extra rinse. He had no idea what was going on. He was dreaming he was on a boat. Story 86. My husband says I talk in my sleep. One night, apparently, I yelled, "I knew you would betray me." He laughed and said that I not only talk in my sleep but also travel back in time. Story 87. Just last night my husband sat up like a bullet and began searching for his watch. He found it, handed it to me like an award, shook my hand, and said he was the mayor of Pumpkintown. I said, "Oh, thank you, Mayor." He then lay down, smiling from ear to ear. I asked, "Were you recently elected?" He said yes and nodded emphatically. He put his watch on and, when I asked why, replied, "I always need to know the time here because I'm the mayor." He was so proud that he repeated it throughout the night. The next day he remembered nothing. Story 88. I once woke up and said, "Pest, Ross," to my brother. Ross said, "What?" I said, "Baby communist." Ross said, "W what?" I fell back asleep. Story 89. My uncle sometimes speaks Japanese in his sleep. He is white, from Wisconsin, and has only rewatched a couple of anime. Story 90. Reported by a college dorm roommate. Apparently they were intimate, and I sat up and yelled, "You have to push it until it breaks." They said they were laughing too hard to resume. I have no memory of this. Story 91. My best friend slept with his new girlfriend for the first time on vacation. People were sharing hotel rooms to save money, so he was in the room with 3 other girls he barely knew. Apparently in the middle of the night he yelled, "Shut up! I can tell if you're actually gay." Story 92. One night my husband said to me, very clearly and in a serious tone, "David Beckham knows the future." Story 93. I am a sleepwalker and sleep talker. So many stories people have shared with me. Here are a few. My husband and his cousin were in the living room playing a video game. I came out and started yelling about how nasty the floor was. They stopped their game and swept and mopped, thinking I was awake and really mad, even though I was sleepwalking. My mother said I used to go into her room some nights and just stand by her bed and stare at her. She would wake up very creeped out. My father found me lying on my back, making bicycling motions with my arms and legs. Story 94. I woke up one night with my wife's hands in my mouth. When I sat up and asked what she was doing, her reply was, "I thought you were a vampire." 20 years later, I still tease her about that one. Story 95. My brother, 17, deeply asleep. Who turned off the puppet show? I, wide awake, yelled, "You did." My brother, "Oh no, it was just getting good. Can you turn it back on?" Story 96. Not a partner story, but when I was a kid, I was in the kitchen late one night getting a drink, when suddenly I heard loud thuds as someone started sprinting down our hallway. My sister burst into the kitchen and just stood there staring, asleep with her eyes open. It scared the ever-living shit out of me. Story 97. While I was asleep with my now ex-boyfriend, I woke up to him sitting up in bed. I tapped his shoulder. He didn't move, so I sat up to see what he was doing. I noticed his hands moving and he was whispering what sounded like non-English phrases. I couldn't get his attention and became worried after a minute or two. He suddenly froze, went rigid, and collapsed back into bed, half on top of me. I started sobbing from confusion and exhaustion. He woke a few seconds later and asked what was wrong. Trying to explain that he had been summoning Satan in his sleep was difficult. Story 98. My Chinese college roommate, who spoke good English but had a fairly thick accent, once sat up in bed, spoke in perfect, clear, American-accented English like a 1930s radio announcer and said, "What a beautiful creature," then went right back to sleep. Story 99. I am a sleep talker. One night I grabbed my husband's junk. When he asked if everything was okay, I replied that it was okay and it was still there. Sometimes I yell at him for things like not parking the car where I want it parked or leaving the house for no reason. One time I begged him not to take the District of Columbia Beltway. Our son is a sleep talker and sleepwalker now. Sometimes he comes into the room and says that he forgot to let Pikachu out to go to the bathroom. We tell him we are sure Pikachu can hold it until morning. He says okay and goes back to bed. Story 100. One night my ex rolled onto her side after falling asleep, giggled, said, "I just made a pile of bodies," and then went back to sleep. I was concerned. Story 101, the worst one. I was watching Oculus, a pretty scary movie. My wife at the time hated scary movies, so I could only watch them very late at night. The movie finished around 3 in the morning and I headed to bed. I usually don't get too scared by movies like that, but when I got into the bedroom, my wife sat straight up and said, "Who is there?" She talks in her sleep regularly, so I was not fazed. I calmed her down and said, "It's only me. Go back to bed." She replied, "No, not you. The guy behind you." I did not sleep at all that night. Story 102. Pretty late to the party, so I guess nobody reads this, but I have a story. Years ago, while working at a beach house, I shared a room with a colleague. He was a sleepwalker, mostly after a couple of beers. The first time it happened, he stood up, opened and closed the water tap a couple of times, and went back to bed. He did not know he had done that. The second time was longer. He walked around, did the water tap thing again, then went outside to urinate on the porch with his genitals exposed to everyone at the campground around 8 in the morning. The third time we both did not wake up. We woke to the floor being wet. We looked at each other, tried to smell whether it was water or urine, but assumed it was water since we could not smell anything. The fourth time I woke up to a very heavy weight on top of me. After his sleepy stroll, he had climbed into my bed, which I was sleeping in. I woke him and he was very confused. Justice 171. What the fuck am I doing in your bed? He had sleepwalked a couple of times when I was out of the house, often ending up in the wrong bed. They were right next to each other. Good times though, I thought it was hilarious. Story 103. One night I was shaken awake by my startled husband. He was sitting up and kept mumbling and pointing to a corner of the bedroom. I asked what was wrong and tried to get him to look at me. Finally, he exclaimed that Miley Cyrus was in the corner. He then promptly lay back down and rolled over without another sound. He left me staring at that corner for a few minutes, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Story 104. I haven't shared this with my wife. A couple of nights ago, she said, "Get your own goddamn porno." I guess in her dream, she just didn't feel like sharing. Story 105. My little sister once got up at 1 a.m. and started getting ready for school. When she came out of the bathroom, I asked her what she was doing. She mumbled that she was getting ready and was late. I told her it was the middle of the night on Saturday. She said, "Oh," and walked back into her room. She is well known for getting up and doing things around the house, but it is starting to stop. Story 106. My ex used to talk in her sleep, and one night I was up late and high watching television when I heard her say very clearly to me, "Let's get McDonald's." I thought it was a great idea, so I got up and started getting dressed. After I finished, I went to wake her, but she was asleep. I shook her a couple of times and said, "Let's go. I'm ready." She finally woke up and said, "What? No, it's late. Go to bed." I was disappointed because I thought she wanted to go and I was too high to drive, so I had to get undressed again and go back to bed. Looking back, I should have known she was talking in her sleep, but I was too high to accept reality and chose to believe I was going to get some McDonald's. Story 107. I am a sleep talker, but apparently I sat up out of nowhere the other night, yelled "Stop fucking staring at me," and rolled back over sound asleep. Story 108. I am a sleep talker. In college, I shared a dorm room with a roommate. One night while he was reading, I apparently sat up halfway, took off my shirt, assumed a push-up position under the covers, and asked, "Would you like to buy some hot dogs?" Then I went back to sleep. Story 109. I had a friend in first grade whom I discovered was a sleep talker when I slept over at his house. I could not fall asleep because I was nervous in a new place, so I lay on the top bunk staring wide-eyed at the ceiling for hours. In the middle of the night, long after he had fallen asleep, he loudly said that we would never get any sleep if I kept talking. I looked at him in the bottom bunk, but he was sound asleep. Story 110. My wife, next to me, is currently saying "oh no" in response to this post. She has very vivid dreams that sometimes persist after waking. A common occurrence is her waking me with, "Hey, wake up. There is a bug, a big black bug." I tell her it is dark and there is no bug. She insists there is a big black bug in the bed and asks whether I want a bug in the bed. Another night, she woke up standing at the toaster making toast. She also woke up to a ghost. This happens frequently. She is semi-conscious, so she usually remembers a lot of this but is not fully lucid. Story 111. My 4-year-old woke me up one night screaming, "Mommy!" He sounded like he was on fire. I jumped up, ran to his room, threw the door open, and found him still sleeping. After a second, he said, "My brother changed my channel. Make him in trouble." Story 112. I tried to nudge my fiancée because she was snoring. When I said, "Honey, please, you're snoring," she giggled. "That's just the front of my dress," and continued snoring. Story 113. I used to talk a lot in my sleep. One of the highlights was when I said my Robbie rhinos are escaping and I do not even have any. I remember dreaming about some sort of zoo tycoon world, but honestly how I came up with this is beyond me. Story 114. My fiancé, out of nowhere in the middle of the night, shouted, "Paintbrush." I said, "What?" She, sounding urgent and panicked, said, "Paintbrush." I asked, "What do you need a paintbrush for?" She replied, as if it should be obvious, "To paint it." She did not remember her dream in the morning, so I still have no idea why she needed that paintbrush so badly. Story 115. My little brother used to have night terrors. He would start screaming so loudly you would have sworn someone was trying to kill him. He was around 7 or 8 years old. I will never forget the first time. Neither my parents nor I had any idea what was happening. I do not think my feet touched a step on the stairs. I moved so quickly to get to him. This went on for about a year and a half, 2 to 3 times a week. It was a good thing we lived in the countryside, or the police would have been called, thinking someone was hurting him. Story 116. My girlfriend tells me things I say in my sleep. My favorites are Keanu Reeves and I am so stoked. Laughing out loud. Story 117. I'm a sleepwalker and sleep talker. Before I moved in, my partner had a flatmate. One night a friend was staying over. I'd already gone to bed, and she and the flatmate were talking on the sofa when I went in and started screaming at him to use a plate and to stop eating mashed potatoes off the floor. When she told me, the next day I couldn't help but laugh because I had been dreaming about throwing a dinner party where everyone ate from the floor instead of plates. I did feel sorry for the flatmate, though, because both my partner and my friend knew about my sleepwalking and sleep talking, and he was terrified because he thought I was awake. Story 118. It is probably too late for anyone to see this, but I had a roommate who used to sleep talk. One time we had some friends over, and at about 1 in the morning we all gave that collective sigh at the end of the night when people were about to leave. My roommate, who was fast asleep on the couch, interrupted the lull with the following verbatim: "Dave's puppet surprises. Either the puppets kill you or it is incredibly pornographic." He had no recollection of whatever dream led to this, but its absurdity and perfect comedic timing were something to behold. Story 119. When I was a child, I once got out of bed, walked to the far side of the house where my mother was and pointed to the floor. I told her, "If you dig right here, you will find buried treasure." Then I turned around and climbed into a different bed in another room. The next morning, I complained to my mother about moving me in my sleep. She laughed and told me the story, and I vaguely remembered a dream about a treasure hunt. Story 120. The first time my girlfriend stayed over, she fell asleep on the couch. I nudged her and asked if she wanted to go to bed. She simply rolled over, tucked her knees up, and pulled her knickers down. She then said that was how I liked it and immediately added that it was okay and that the others just liked to watch. We were alone, and after I woke her, she had no recollection of why she had said that. Another time she sat bolt upright in bed, stripped, and walked to the bathroom. There she stood at the light switch and flicked it on and off, saying on and off repeatedly. It turned out she could not understand why, after turning the light off and then on again, she was still in the bathroom and not back in bed. Story 121. My friend was asleep in the living room when I walked past to use the bathroom. I heard him randomly shout kebab, followed by mint yogurt. He was ordering food in his sleep. Story 122. Oh, my time to finally shine, I guess. This happened in rural Texas, in a small town with fewer people than it takes to change a light bulb. I had never been more creeped out, since I am from a mid-sized city. It was late in the evening, around 1 or 2 in the morning, and my girlfriend, who I had no idea talked in her sleep at the time, sat straight up in bed, pointed out the window, and said in a creepy, sing-song voice, "There is someone at the window." I, like a reasonable person, told her to lie down, go back to sleep, and stop playing. The next morning she told me she had been dreaming about work and meant that someone was at the drive-thru. I was angry and scared. Story 123. I'm doing both. Sleep talking mostly involves waking my girlfriend and explaining nonsense to her. One time I was dreaming of combat and woke up with her in an armbar. I wasn't pressing hard, but I was still in shock. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.